Janice's knuckles whitened as she gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged animal. The sputtering of the engine faded into an ominous silence as the old sedan rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the desolate highway, cutting through the dense Oregon forest. "No, no, no," she muttered, twisting the key desperately, but the engine only clicked uselessly in response. The fuel gauge mocked her with its unwavering needle pinned below empty. Janice popped the hood and slid out into the chilly night air, wrapping her arms around herself against the biting cold. She peered into the car's mechanical guts, knowing it was futile. The gas tank was bone dry, just like her options. No cell service, no gas, no one who knew where she was. She was utterly alone. A haunting howl pierced the stillness, raising the hairs on the back of Janice's neck. She whirled around, scanning the impenetrable wall of shadowy trees crowding the roadside. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by another, then another. A chorus of chilling cries swelled from the darkness surrounding her. Janice's breath caught in her throat as dozens of glowing amber eyes blinked open between the gnarled trunks, fixing on her with predatory focus. A hulking shape detached from the shadows, prowling onto the asphalt with a menacing growl. It was far too large to be a normal wolf, with powerful haunches and a barreled chest. More beasts slunk out to join it, their wicked curved claws gouging the pavement. Werewolves. Janice's blood turned to ice in her veins. She'd heard the old tales growing up in these woods, whispered legends of men and women who shed their human skins to become ravenous beasts when the moon grew full. She never imagined they could be real. The pack crept closer, lips curling back from enormous fangs that glinted in the moonlight. Ropes of steaming drool swung from their jaws as they growled, a bone-chilling sound that vibrated in Janice's chest. She stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste to put the car between herself and the monsters. With an ear-splitting crash, a werewolf leapt onto the hood in an explosion of crumpling metal. Janice screamed as its massive head smashed through the windshield in a spray of glass. She lunged into the back seat, scrabbling for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the cold metal of the tire iron, just as putrid breath washed over her face. She swung the iron with all her strength, connecting with the beast's skull with a sickening crunch. It reeled back with a pained yelp, shaking its misshapen head. Janice struck it again and again, desperate to keep its snapping jaws at bay. All around the car, the pack bayed and snarled, hurling their bodies against the doors. The metal dented and buckled under their assault. Janice knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through and ripped her to shreds. The werewolf lunged again, its yellow fangs sinking into her calf. Janice screamed as white-hot agony ripped through her. She brought the tire iron down on the beast's spine with a stomach-turning crack. It released her with a whimper and slumped to the floor, its legs twitching. Warm blood gushed from the deep punctures, soaking Janice's jeans. The world tilted around her as shock and blood loss took hold. She collapsed back against the seat, the tire iron slipping from her numb fingers. As her vision tunneled to black, the last thing Janice saw was the shattered windshield filling with the glowing eyes and gleaming teeth of the werewolves as they surged into the car, eager to claim their prize. She knew she would be just another missing person, her gnawed bones left to bleach in the forest. The monsters had won, as they always did. No one would hear her screams. The hungry forest would devour all trace of Janice Miller, and the werewolves would melt back into the shadows, their bellies full, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander down that lonely stretch of highway. The full moon hung low and ominous in the night sky as Highway Patrolman Jim Riley began his graveyard shift patrol. He had grown up on the nearby Navajo reservation, steeped in the dark legends and superstitions of his people. But Jim had long ago rejected those old stories as nothing more than childish folklore. Still, something about the eerie stillness of this night made his skin prickle with unease. Jim's truck rumbled down the lonely stretch of Arizona's Highway 491, known to locals as the Devil's Highway. Dense pine forests flanked the road, their dark boughs seeming to reach out like grasping claws in the moonlight. An oppressive silence blanketed the night, broken only by the growl of the truck's engine. As he scanned the road ahead, a flicker of movement among the trees caught Jim's eye. He eased off the accelerator, squinting into the darkness. For a moment he thought he glimpsed a pair of glowing amber eyes reflecting in the headlights. Jim shook his head, dismissing it as just a deer or coyote. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl shattered the quiet, seeming to come from all directions at once. The hair on the back of Jim's neck stood on end as the unearthly sound reverberated through the night. More howls answered the first, growing louder and closer with each passing second. A primal terror gripped Jim as he realized these were no ordinary coyotes. Slamming the accelerator to the floor, Jim sent the truck surging forward. But in the rearview mirror, he saw massive shadowy forms emerge from the trees, loping after him with impossible speed. Jim's heart pounded in his ears as he pushed the truck to its limits. But the beasts matched his pace, rapidly gaining ground. With a sickening crunch of metal, an enormous creature landed heavily on the truck's hood. Jim stared in horror at the towering werewolf, its matted fur caked with dried blood, its ember eyes blazing with feral hunger. The stench of rotting meat washed over him as the beast drew back its lips in a snarl, exposing jagged fangs dripping with saliva. Jim barely had time to react before the werewolf's massive paw smashed through the windshield, showering him with glass. Razor claws raked the air inches from his face as he fought to keep the truck under control. Swerving wildly, Jim managed to fling the creature off, but not before its claws gouged deep furrows in the metal. The truck careened off the road, rolling violently down an embankment before slamming into a tree. Battered and bleeding, Jim fumbled for a shotgun with shaking hands. The werewolves closed in around the wreckage, their growls reverberating through the twisted metal. Jim knew he would not survive this night. As the beasts lunged, Jim unloaded both barrels into the lead werewolf's chest. The silver buckshot tore through fur and flesh, but the creature barely slowed. Jim's screams cut off in a wet gurgle as the werewolf's jaws closed around his throat, sharp teeth shearing through skin and muscle and bone. The Devil's Highway had claimed another victim, as it had for centuries. The werewolves melted back into the forest, leaving behind only the savaged, bloody ruin of Jim Riley's corpse. The moon continued its impassive journey across the sky, the only witness to the night's grisly events. Come dawn, only the stripped and crumpled remains of the truck would be found. Jim Riley would become just another missing person, his fate forever a mystery. But the werewolves would be waiting, as they always had, for the next unfortunate soul to travel that lonely stretch of highway under the light of the full moon. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I pulled my mud-caked boots up the 3 cracked cement steps and through the smudged glass door of the 24-hour truck stop diner. The air inside felt thick and stale, tinged with the odor of fryer grease and pine-scented cleaner. I had been driving for hours along the desolate highway that cut through the heavily wooded hills of rural Maine, trying to outrun my demons. Now, in the dead of night, the Silent Pines diner looked like the only port in the storm. A bored-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter, her eyes bloodshot and her hair disheveled as if she had been sleeping in the back room. "Sit wherever you like, Han," she said with a weary sigh, gesturing vaguely at the mostly empty dining room. I slid into a booth with ripped vinyl seats and a laminated menu sticky with syrup. Through the blinds, I could see the full moon hanging low and ominous on the horizon, painting the parking lot with a pallid, ghostly light. The lot was empty except for a rusted pickup truck and a couple of big rigs. The night felt unnaturally still and silent, like the calm before a storm. I ordered a coffee and a plate of runny eggs, forcing myself to eat, even though my stomach was in knots. I hadn't been sleeping well lately, not since I'd fallen off the wagon again. The words for my novel just wouldn't come, and the bitter sting of whiskey was the only thing that seemed to quiet the pounding in my head. But now I was regretting that last drink and the hundreds before it. My estranged wife's angry voice echoed in my mind. I needed to get my shit together, or I'd lose everything for good this time. Lost in my own dark thoughts, I didn't notice at first when the screaming started. It erupted from the kitchen, a woman's shrill cry abruptly cut short, replaced by a wet gurgling and a heavy thud. I leapt to my feet just as the waitress came tearing out from the back, her eyes wide with terror. She made it halfway across the diner before a dark shape exploded through the swinging door and tackled her to the checkered tile floor. The thing crouched over her twitching body was barely recognizable as human. Coarse black fur sprouted from its bulging muscles, and its elongated snout was lined with jagged teeth. Curved claws glinted in the harsh light as it tore into the waitress's throat, silencing her screams forever. Blood splattered the walls and booths like a Jackson Pollock painting. The creature lifted its head and locked its glowing amber eyes on me. A low growl rumbled in its chest as it rose to its full height, towering over me at nearly 7 feet tall. Adrenaline surged through my veins and my heart pounded like a jackhammer. I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by primal fear. In that moment, I understood with terrifying clarity that the thing before me was no mere animal. It was something far more ancient and evil, a werewolf, a nightmare made flesh, and it was here for me. The beast lunged with supernatural speed, its razor claws slashing toward my face. I stumbled backwards, narrowly avoiding having my throat ripped out. I grabbed a chair and swung it with all my strength, connecting with the werewolf's skull with a sickening crack. The creature snarled in pain and fury, shaking off the blow like it was nothing. I turned and sprinted for the door, my heart feeling like it would burst out of my chest. I could hear the werewolf's pounding footsteps and ragged breathing right behind me as I burst out into the parking lot. The night air was cold as ice against my skin. I ran for the woods, praying I could lose the creature in the dense underbrush. Branches tore at my face and arms as I crashed through the foliage in blind panic. The werewolf's howls echoed through the trees, spurring me to run faster even as my lungs screamed for air. And then the ground disappeared from under my feet, and I was falling, tumbling down a rocky embankment. I landed hard at the bottom of a ravine, pain shooting through my battered body. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, I could see the werewolf stalking toward me, its eyes glowing with feral hunger. I closed my eyes, waiting for the killing blow. So this was how it would end, torn to pieces by a monster in the backwoods of Maine, just another ruined man who had destroyed himself with the bottle. It seemed fitting, in a way. But the final bite never came. I opened my eyes to see the werewolf convulsing on the ground, its body twisting and contorting grotesquely. Bones snapped and reformed as the creature shifted, its fur receding and features morphing. In moments, the beast was gone and a naked man lay before me, his skin pale as milk in the moonlight. With a shock, I recognized him. It was Earl, the old drunk who was a regular at the local dive bar in town. The man who always sat in the corner nursing a whiskey, never saying a word to anyone. The man who I'd dismissed as just another pathetic small-town boozer, never suspecting the evil that lurked within. Earl's eyes fluttered open, hazy and unfocused. He stared at me for a long moment, his face etched with misery and regret. "I'm sorry," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I can't control it. The hunger. It takes me over." I stared at him in stunned silence, my mind reeling. Earl's gaze drifted past me, to the full moon hanging bright in the sky. A single tear slid down his grizzled cheek. "Please," he said softly, "please, kill me." Before I hurt anyone else. Before I become that thing again. I looked at the broken man lying before me, and I saw myself reflected in his anguished eyes. How many times had I lost control, let the bottle turn me into someone I didn't recognize? How long before I finally destroyed myself, or worse, hurt the people I loved? I thought of my wife, my kids, my unfinished novel, all the things I'd thrown away, all the promises I'd broken. The werewolf was a monster, there was no doubt about that. But maybe, in the end, men like Earl and I were the real monsters. The ones who let the darkness inside us win. I turned and walked away, leaving Earl to face the long night alone with his demons, just as I would have to face my own. The moon watched me go, cold and merciless, a silent judge of all our sins.